Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you to what I think is going to be a very stimulating and exciting event about one of the world's most fascinating cities, Havana. Before getting started with my very brief introductory remarks, I wanted to again just mention that there's the headsets for people who don't speak Spanish in particular, and there's two of our presentations which will be simultaneously translated into Spanish. So please feel free to get a headset if you don't have one already. And I'm going to keep my remarks quite brief. Our speakers all have incredibly illustrious backgrounds and have many achievements. We have more detailed biographical sheets on each of them. So if you haven't got one yet, please feel free to pick one up and you can read in more detail about each of our speakers and their individual histories. So it's my pleasure tonight to welcome you to an event, the focus of which is going to be, as you know, Havana. And this is a city that is familiar to many of us because of the images that circulate in architectural circles and in the popular media, and which show a city which could only be described as an urban jewel. Since the Cuban Revolution, relatively little of the built environment of Havana has been completely destroyed, but relatively little has also been built anew. So the end result is a city that is incredibly beautiful, but also very easy to romanticize. And as you will hear this evening, the city also faces immense challenges that are sometimes obscured by this romantic gloss, and those include challenges around housing, infrastructure, public service delivery, to name just a few pressing areas of concern that you're going to hear some more about shortly. Now, given the period of economic and political transition happening now in Cuba, and the thawing of relations between Cuba and the United States, we thought it would be a fantastic time to put Havana on center stage here at the GSD. And our intention is to look at the city from a variety of angles and through a variety of professional lenses. And to do that, we have with us this evening some of the most interesting and dynamic urban thinkers in Cuba. And these speakers are going to take us on a journey. We're going to start at a wide scale, and then we're going to zoom in to a more architectural and urban design scale to look at a city and try to understand a city better that is so close to us and yet is so poorly understood to American audiences. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers in the order in which they're going to be speaking. First, Jasper Goldman, who will begin our presentations tonight, an urban planner and filmmaker working in Havana. Jasper will begin by setting the stage for some of the following talks and also describing some of the challenges that face the city. Following Jasper, we'll hear from Carlos Rodriguez, a dynamic architect and urban filmmaker who will introduce and present a clip from a film he and colleagues are working on called Los Hablemos, which documents historic preservation efforts in Havana. And Carlos's presentation will provide an introduction also to a talk by Patricia Rodriguez, Director of Planning for the Office of the Historian of the City of Havana, who will describe her agency's efforts to balance conservation and development pressures in the city of Havana. And finally, we'll hear from Orlando Inclán and Claudia Castillo, two trailblazing Cuban architects and co-founders of Havana Regeneración, an exciting new group that seeks to develop new ideas for the future of Havana. Now, I'm sorry to say that Miguel Coyula, one of our invited speakers who works with the Group for the Integrated Development of the Capital, could not join us tonight due to some diplomatic wrangling. Now, fortunately, our incredibly talented and diverse panel will be able to cover the material we'd hoped he would present, but his absence actually serves as a very useful reminder that despite constant discussion about changing times in Cuba and changing relationship between the United States and Cuba, of course, there is a great deal of complexity that remains. And together tonight, the speakers that have joined us are going to try to improve our understanding of Havana, again, from a variety of angles, and allow us to understand in particular how the future of this city might unfold. And after hearing from our speakers about the complexity, challenges, and opportunities presented by Havana, we will have a question and answer session with the audience, and then we will adjourn to a public reception in the lobby of Gund Hall. So please do join us for that. And that will be at 8:30. Now, before turning over the podium to our first speaker, Jasper Goldman, I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to some organizations that made this event possible: the City Club of New York, the Ludwig Foundation of Cuba, the GSD Social Agency Lab, and of course, the superb events and computer resources teams here at the GSD. I'd also like to thank our wonderful interpreters, Laura Eastman and Jennifer Beauchamp-Ancany as well. And without further ado, I'd now like to welcome Jasper Goldman to the podium. Jasper.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I want to take the opportunity to thank you and all of the GSD for hosting us. It's really a very special, very timely conversation that I think we're going to have tonight. And I'm very grateful. We all are very grateful that you've been able to make it happen. Now, I'm not Cuban, as you've probably gathered, but I've been working there for the last 5 years. And basically, myself, Carlos, Linda Rodriguez, and Philippe Rutland, who are all here tonight, have been making a series of movies for the Office of the Historian of the City of Havana. And you'll see some clips of a couple of them. And we've been working with Patricia Rodriguez, who you also hear from. And Carlos will talk a little bit more about our work. Now, in the course of making those movies, the idea for this delegation visit to America, to Boston, and to New York next week came up. And I want to talk a little bit about what the idea behind the delegation is, and really why the conversation we're having tonight is so timely, in our opinion. Now, I first went to Havana in 1996, and I returned in 2007. And I think probably most visitors to Havana have a similar kind of experience. I was struck by the problems of the city, the housing, the transportation, the dilapidation, but I was also blown away by the incredible architectural heritage of the city. And I was just struck by how intact it was. Now, I'm an urban planner, and my first thought was, my God, this is a city that has avoided all the mistakes that American and European cities have typically made. This is a city without urban renewal, that hasn't put highways right in the middle. It's really fantastic. And when you go to Havana, one of the first things that you notice is the street life. You notice children playing in the streets and old people hanging out, and it dawns on you after a while that this is only possible because there are so few cars. And the first thought that you have is can we preserve this? Can we keep this? Is it inevitable that we will lose this? And you start to think, if only Havana can really avoid all the mistakes that other cities have made and develop in a really thoughtful and sensible way, it could be a wonderful place. It already is a wonderful place, but it could be even more spectacular. But I have to say that in those early trips, in those early years, from 2007 to 2010, it was also quite bleak to visit Cuba. It felt like nearly every young person that I spoke to wanted to leave. Everybody, it seemed like they were very frustrated by the state of the country. I mean, some of you may not know this, but the average salary in Cuba is $15 a month. And it's not an especially cheap country to live in. A lot of the essentials are actually more expensive in Cuba than they are here in the United States because they have to be imported to the island. So it can be a very frustrating place to be, and a challenge, actually, just to have a good life. And so when you, in that kind of atmosphere, when you start to talk to people about the future of the city and what the possibilities are, at that moment, people sort of rolled their eyes. They didn't see a great future for Havana. And so it wasn't really a conversation that you could have as one would want. And I'm happy to say that in the last few years, Cuba may have changed more than in the preceding decades. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with those changes. The government is updating its system, its political and economic system, and there are many economic reforms to do with property and many other things. The relations with the United States, I'm sure you've noticed, have started to thaw. And so you're seeing that change very visibly now in Cuba. In Havana particularly, there are lots of new businesses, there's a sense of vitality, and there's even, I would say, for the first time since I've been going there, a sense of hope in the city. There was the Havana Biennial in June, and it was wonderful. There was public art everywhere. There were kids in the street playing with sculptures that artists had created on the Malecón. It was just fantastic. And you really had this feeling that Havana is just not a backwater anymore. Some days it feels like all the eyes of the world are looking at Havana. And so against this backdrop, it feels like the city is going to change. It feels like there's a tremendous pent-up demand for new development. It feels like with the reforms and more interest in Cuba, it feels like there's going to be massive change. And the real question is Havana ready for that change? And I would say that the answer, in many respects, is no. And I'll give you two reasons for that, of many. The first is simply the state of the architectural and planning professions. And I think it's fair to say that in this overall climate that Cuba's been in this special period of the last 20 years of really being stunted and held back in many respects, the architectural and planning professions have really suffered. And I'll give you an example of that. It really feels like they've been deprived of the opportunities that the architects working elsewhere have had. Carlos Rodriguez is the next speaker to speak. And this is his first trip outside of Cuba. And that's wonderful for him. But it's, I think, incredibly sad that it's not that he hasn't wanted to travel. For 12 years being an architect, I'm sure he's been very keen to leave Cuba and see the world. But those kinds of opportunities that we all, I think, take for granted have simply not really been available for Cuban architects and planners. And you worry about what kind of impact that must have on them to sort of prevent them from reaching their full professional potential. And think for a minute about what it means to be here at the GSD and the wonderful exhibits and the wonderful things that you get exposed to on a daily basis. And imagine where you'd be if you were studying here if you didn't have access to those kinds of opportunities. And then think about Cuba, where the whole architectural profession, it sometimes feels like, doesn't have access to those opportunities. And you get a sense of what the problem is and why the country may not be ready for a lot of development in a fast period of time. So this delegation visit has been conceived really as a means of starting conversations to some degree about how we can address that. And we'd really love to hear your ideas about what could be done to really help the country and help the planning and the architectural professions. Now, there's another very important reason why I don't think the country is ready, the city is ready for major change. And that is that there's no real sort of thoughtful, thought-through idea or vision of how the city should develop. There are some very bad ideas, I think, about how the city should develop. One Cuban official was quoted as saying that Varadero, which is a small, quite large actually, beach resort about 2 hours from Havana, the model for Varadero should be Cancun. Now, I'm sure it's probably obvious, but let me try and spell out why that's a bad idea. The first is that if Cuba and Havana starts to reorientate its infrastructure towards mass tourism and spring breakers, I mean, the country is very fragile. It would really be ruined if that was the model that the country tried to follow. But the other thing is that, I said earlier that all eyes feel like they're on Cuba. There's tremendous curiosity, and it feels like everybody I meet wants to come and visit Cuba. And I think that's because the country is so unique. And I think if the country loses that, then it'll lose what I think is the major economic opportunity for the country, which is to preserve its uniqueness, preserve its culture, preserve what keeps it special, and build an economy around that, rather than try and replicate another place. Now, another major model for Havana is Miami. And Miami and Havana have a very close relationship due to all the back and forth and the fact that Miami is where the majority of Cuban expats live and so forth. And I think it's probably obvious to say that Miami shouldn't be, or we think it shouldn't be, a real model for Havana for many reasons. But it's important to remember that that's not the way many people see it. To them, shopping malls and high-rises and highways, these are signs of progress. And many years ago, I worked for a long time in China. And in Beijing, you saw so much architectural heritage just be destroyed and so many bad planning ideas get implemented. And yet, for many people, this was a sign of progress. They were proud of this. And Miguel Quiola, I wish he were here tonight because he's a wonderful, wise, fantastic planner. But I'm going to steal one of his lines. He said that he shows a slide of Shanghai, and he says that these kinds of cities are no longer Chinese cities. They're cities that are in China. And many of them even have Chinatowns now because they need neighborhoods that are distinctively Chinese because the rest of the city is not. And that, I think, raises a really critical question about Havana and the future of Havana, which is, will it continue to be a Cuban city, or will it be a city in Cuba? And that's a really fundamental question, I think, to answer. Can it really develop while staying unique? And what does the city really want to be? Now, I've heard several people say that, on the one hand, the destruction of the city is inevitable. You cannot stop the market. You cannot stop all the developers from coming in and doing what they do and really ruining it. And don't even bother trying to stop it. And I've heard other people say it'll never happen. The government will never let Havana be destroyed. Don't worry, everything is okay. And I believe that nothing is inevitable. Nothing is written. It could really go either way. And that, for me, makes conversations like this incredibly important to have, both in Cuba, especially in Cuba, but also around here, and for people who are in a position to really help the country and help the professionals who are working there. And I think clearly we need to do that to strengthen Cuban architects and planners. And clearly we need more thought, more ideas, more discussion about where the future of the city really should be. And thank you so much for coming and participating in a conversation that we hope will be along those lines. But there's one final thought that I wanted to mention as well. It's really important, I think, to learn from the city as it is now and learn from the planners and architects who are working there right now. I mean, despite everything I've said, some amazing things have happened in Cuba over the last few decades. Patricia Rodriguez is going to tell us about the miracle, the preservation miracle of what's happened in Old Havana. And Inclán and Claudia are going to talk about lots of other things that are very, very positive about what's happening in the city right now. There's a wonderful sustainability that I mentioned earlier that really is important to preserve. And really seeing and understanding the city as it is now is critical, I think, before trying to reach conclusions about what the future should be. So I think there's so much to learn from the city, and not just for its future, for all cities' futures, actually. I think if the sustainability that exists and this wonderful culture that exists in Havana, I think every place can learn from that and will benefit from learning from that. And for any of you who are thinking of getting involved in the city, I can only say from a personal note, you'll get so much more out of it than you'll put in. There's so much to learn, and it's really been the highlight, I think, of my professional life to be involved in Cuba and to have the privilege of working with the speakers tonight. And I really hope that the presentations tonight set the stage for a great discussion, and I hope that discussion continues and we can really do some good here. And thank you so much for coming again.
Thank you, Jasper, for setting the stage for our coming presentations. So our next presenter is Carlos Rodriguez. As I mentioned, he's an architect and filmmaker, and he's going to talk about his work and actually show a clip from a film that he and several colleagues who are also here have been working on that hones in on a particularly important tension that faces Havana and many other cities, which is this tension between development and historic preservation. So without further ado, Carlos, please.
Good evening. Thank you, Mike, for your presentation. And excuse me a little bit of my nerves. I'm experiencing many first times right now, many first things right now. So going with some personal history. So in 2010, I was very lucky to be part of, let's say, a multinational film production team. Okay, this may not sound like a big deal, but to me, as a recently graduated architect, I was lucky enough to participate in this video with 3 people coming from 3 different sites outside of Cuba, which was Jasper, who you just met, Felipe Rutjand, and Linda Rodriguez. And we come out with a very interesting experience. At the beginning, I was only asked to do some translations and some graphics for the video. But I ended up being part of this very interesting way of filmmaking. I'm talking about an 18 minutes short video that was actually commissioned by the Master Plan Office of the Historian's Office of Old Havana, which is actually headed by Patricia Rodriguez, who will soon be with you giving some more details about their work. And by then, they had the idea of bringing their upcoming 5-year plans to the residents of Old Havana. So I'm talking about probably the first public consultation related with urban planning in Cuba. So this video could work actually as an icebreaker for those meetings that were actually going to be part of the public presentation presentation. Okay. So at the beginning, we just started to film and to process a lot of technical information from the officials of the Master Plan Office. But then we came up with the idea of having the input of the residents of Old Havana, who actually are the residents of the users of Old Havana, the real users of Old Havana. And we came up with this very interesting, very rich, and very interactive video that actually we felt was very close to what was intended for the video that was, to encourage the residents to take part of the new process, of the new plans for the city. So also, as an architect, I have always been worried about how to present, how to communicate, our ideas, the architect's idea, the planner's ideas, because a client and somebody else is not very well related with the technical CAD drawings or something, it's not very easy to understand you. So, for example, in this video, we started to process a lot of colored plans, a lot of maps that wasn't a very good idea to present in the video. So we decided to turn it into 3D models. So we're talking about nearly 4,000 buildings, a model of 4,000 buildings of Old Havana. And so you can have it. So, but anyway, without giving you many more details about this film, I'm very proud to present to you right now a short clip of what is Hablemos de La Habana Vieja. As I said, thank you very much for hosting us tonight. It's really an honor. It's really very thrilling experience right now. And I just hope you enjoy Hablemos de La Habana Vieja.
La importancia de La Habana Vieja no puede ser menospreciada, no solo en el contexto cubano, sino tampoco en el contexto de toda América Latina.
En La Habana Vieja, en este pequeño espacio, hay una enorme concentración de símbolos, de historia, de tradición, de cultura.
Y es una ciudad mágica, como París, como Nueva York, como Tokio. Respiran arte, son ciudades que tienen una historia muy hermosa, ¿me entiendes?
Pero a pesar de su belleza e importancia, hay partes de La Habana que necesitan ser restauradas con urgencia.
Yo vivo en La Habana y tú sabes lo triste que me siento cuando me dicen ¿de qué tú me hablas si La Habana se está cayendo?
Y mucha de la infraestructura que es clave en la ciudad necesita ser actualizada.
La situación con el agua un poco mala.
Nosotros, allá se elaboró un documento de planeamiento urbano que se denomina el Plan Especial de Desarrollo Integral del Territorio. Este plan, en esta ocasión, queremos someterlo a la consulta pública para que la población nos pueda enriquecer a nosotros con sus conocimientos.
La opinión de la gente es importante. Si tú no vas a la calle y no buscas la opinión de la gente, ¿cómo tú te vas a empapar directamente de los problemas y las necesidades que tiene la gente?
Un plan construido solo por especialistas no tiene sentido, porque el objetivo del plan es el ser humano, son los residentes, son las personas que vienen a visitar el territorio.
La Habana fue fundada en 1514 y rápidamente, ya para la segunda mitad del siglo XVI, se había convertido en una gran ciudad. La Habana Vieja es un área de unos 2 kilómetros cuadrados, conformada de la ciudad colonial amurallada, más una zona de ampliación del siglo XIX, que va a lo largo del Paseo del Prado, desde el Fuerte La Punta hasta la estación central de ferrocarriles. Viene a ser un territorio de unos 3.500 edificios, 22.000 viviendas y 70.000 residentes. Al comienzo de los 90, la mayoría de los edificios y espacios públicos se encontraban en precarias condiciones. En 1993, a la oficina del historiador se le dieron facultades excepcionales sobre La Habana Vieja y fue autorizada para implementar un plan de desarrollo integral y autosostenible desde el punto de vista financiero.
He restaurado alrededor de 12 obras que se me ha asignado como ejecutor de obra. Esta es una obra que es una escuela taller que se está rescatando para darle trabajo a los muchachos jóvenes.
Esa filosofía que tiene la restauración, que es basados en la cultura, pues es nuestra identidad, es cómo somos, explica de dónde venimos. Todo ese paquete es muy interesante para los visitantes.
Troviamo che La Habana sia bellissima e ogni anno c'è un pezzo nuovo restaurato.
Más de 1,5 millones de visitantes vienen a La Habana Vieja cada año. Ellos van gastando dinero en hoteles, restaurantes y cafés. Anualmente, esto genera 423 millones de cubs, los cuales son reinvertidos en la reconstrucción de La Habana Vieja.
Que se ha recuperado prácticamente una tercera parte del territorio. De los 3.500 edificios que forman el centro histórico, decimos que ya hay alrededor de 400 que han sido ya recuperados por este proceso.
El problema es que por mucha restauración que se haga en La Habana Vieja, los parques, los lugares fundamentales no llegan aquí donde estamos nosotros.
La opinión de los residentes es fundamental. Queremos conocer cuáles son sus criterios con respecto al futuro del centro histórico.
La Oficina del Historiador ha dividido la consulta pública en 5 categorías principales: estrategia urbana, cultura, economía, vivienda e infraestructura en general. Estos son los temas en los que se están buscando las opiniones de los residentes. Durante la consulta pública, la Oficina del Historiador organizará reuniones y otras actividades para tratar de llegar a la mayor cantidad de residentes posible.
La población nos puede dar, de manera general, el saber popular.
Serán muy bien atendidas. Tenemos necesidad de escucharlos y tenemos necesidad no solo de escucharlos, sino de conversar, de interactuar.
Arreglar las calles, pintar la fachada, hacerle algo recreativo a los niños, que es muy importante, que escúchalo como están.
A mí me gustaría ver más espacios libres, ¿no? Con hierbitas y cositas para nosotros podernos sentar con la familia y con llevar a los perros.
A mí me gusta que estuviera limpia, que todo el mundo reciclara.
Pero bueno, nos gustaría que como esto se hicieran muchos lugares más de lo que es venta, de como trabajadores por cuenta propia.
Que las calles estuvieran arregladas, que tú podías salir y por lo menos yo podía ponerme tacones, que no me los pongo. Me pongo tacones, imagínate.
Que todo lo que se le puede hacer se le haga, porque esta es la cara del país, ¿entiendes? Esta es la cara del país.
Porque nosotros somos los que podemos en un momento determinado arreglar nuestra propia ciudad, porque esta ciudad es la casa de nosotros. Esta es mi ciudad, tú sabes lo feliz que yo me siento cuando yo digo soy de La Habana.
Barrio barroco que tiene tanto sabor y tan real, que a flor de piel lleva su madera, su folclor. Yo soy de un barrio barroco que tiene tanto que andar, con la bondad, con el dolor, lleva de bandera de maldad. Yo soy de un barrio barroco que tiene espiritual, barroco sol, barroco mar, vive como puede y como está. Ay, vive como puede y como está. Yo soy de un barrio barroco que tiene tanto sabor y tan real, que a flor de piel lleva su madera.
Thank you, Carlos. That was fantastic. And I should say that this is one of the few times this movie has been, well, even shown in the States, but particularly in the presence of one of the movie's own celebrities. The head of the master plan for, she's laughing, for the historic core of Havana, Patricia Rodriguez. And what we're going to do now is hone in even further on this really important tension, as Jasper mentioned at the outset. This tension between conservation versus development is a huge issue. And one of the people grappling with this every day is Patricia Rodriguez, who is the head of the master plan for the Office of the Historian of the City of Havana. And she's going to walk us through this tension in a lot more detail, talking through her own work to try to reconcile these two opposing forces in the city. So, Patricia, please.
Good afternoon to everyone. And just like Carlitos said, I am very excited to be here and to get to know Mike Hooper and to have the opportunity to be here in Harvard. I think that we are all here sharing with you our experiences, and it reflects the fact that we are not only in an era of change, but of development. This type of meeting, I think, is making the foundation for a new collaboration and a new relationship. So I want to thank Mike especially for having us here today, and Jasper, who has also been working with us in everything that has been going on, which is quite incredible. It's an honor to be here in Harvard. It's kind of like a dream that we've always had for our entire lives. And even though we're here today, we still don't quite believe it. Thank you, Mike, also for recognizing that Havana is a jewel. I think it's almost like a rare bird, you know, that Jasper had mentioned when he was passionately speaking. But it is a city that has survived because it kind of was frozen in time. It survived this development surge in the 60s and 70s, but after that, it really went through very difficult, transformative years. I think that this has led to very serious problems. Havana is now, as Jasper had said, it can be looked at as a miracle of conservation, and there's a huge number of opportunities to take advantage of. We're also very happy to be here with you in order to take that first step across the bridge that will link Havana with Harvard and other cities maybe in the United States, so that we can learn more. We've been living in a society that has been quite different, and now we need to face new challenges with the knowledge and with the tools that we need, both scientific and professional tools, in order to kind of save that rare bird. So I begin my presentation with an explanation of the historical center of Havana. It's a very small area in comparison with the rest of the country. There's about 35,000 hectares that have been urbanized in Havana. As we can see, it developed a lot in the western area and in the south, but not so much in the east. We see here also the bay that has been very important in our history. This historical center has been declared a national monument since 1978 and a World Cultural Heritage Site since 1982. So one of the first historical centers that was actually made into a cultural heritage site. This is the old Havana, which is very well conserved to date. Also the fortifications, which is one of the fortified cities that is more complex in all of America. This, as you know, started in the colonial periods of the Spanish, when they made the military fortified city in Havana. It's a very complex area because it's the historical center and fortifications that defended the colonial city, which is kind of dispersed in that area. Some of them are right next to the historical center, but others are a little further away. In terms of the plazas, we have been trying to conserve all of the plazas that we have. Havana has always been polycentric, and it continues to be so today. It also continues to serve and conserve this heritage. We continue to face major challenges. We actually have specific strategies in order to face all of these difficult challenges. Every year we face numerous hurricanes. I know that some areas here in the United States have also suffered from those natural disasters, which have the capacity to completely destroy all buildings. In Cuba, thankfully, we haven't had lots of casualties among our citizens, but it has destroyed a lot of the goods and a lot of the property that we have had. This in a city that, as I said, has been frozen in time, which is positive in some ways and negative in others. So it is our responsibility to have Havana be born again as a new city, but one that now to reverse all of this deterioration is going to be quite costly. We would like to start with the main plazas, the public areas, and then we would like to go around the borders of the city, which border the water, and then focus on the center of Havana, which is where all of the inhabitants live. Up here you can see some of the buildings and the state of deterioration that they are in. You would think that, it was in a time of war, but no, in fact, it's just over the years, it has just deteriorated slowly. I would like to show you a series of photos so that you have an idea of what we are facing and what we have faced these last 20 years when we have been trying to conserve our historical center. In those 20 years, we have been looked at kind of like as a laboratory that shows that it is possible to transform a city by conserving its characteristics, its culture, its essence. You can really appreciate here the different facades of the buildings and how all of that has been updated and conserved. And these pictures are quite beautiful. It seems like this just happens in a matter of seconds, but it's actually a group of tireless professionals who have been working hard at making this city a restored one. It's not only the buildings that we try to restore, but also the industrial heritage, as you can see here in this picture, which is right along the water. We've begun restoring this site, as well as the infrastructure that also have to be modernized so that life within the historical center will be possible and we can have a contemporary life. This is a theater that's actually quite beautiful. It's a symbol in Havana, and we have been able to restore it. It's named after the José Martí, who is kind of the idol of the independence of Cuba. And so this theater Martí was able to be restored. Look at the state in which it was in, and now look at how beautiful it looks. We've already been able to put it to the service of all of the inhabitants and all of the citizens to hold their functions in. This also has been about 20 months of efforts. Not only is it a very beautiful and important a building in which there are 5 different ballet schools, it's also being restored with state-funded resources. We have been working with resources that are produced in Old Havana, and we are associated with the historian's office that's administering tourism and being able to obtain all of the resources in order to revert all of this deterioration and be able to achieve the restoration of these beautiful buildings. The state is already putting forth some of their own resources in order to conserve all of these buildings because it's of such great importance. This is another building that has also been, the restoration of this building has been launched recently, which is the National Capitol Building. It's an emblematic building that I think is going to be the center of Old Havana. It's very important. It's a great responsibility to restore this building just because of what it means, what it signifies. For the government to have a restored building in an area that's being restored by the government is, I think, of incredible importance. It also recognizes the conservation efforts that have been carried out. So I think that this is a very important dynamic for all of the resources and restoration that we have been doing. So some of the lessons that we have learned from Old Havana and what we have to keep in mind. I'm sure that, I don't know where Jasper went to, but Havana is going to come back to being the beautiful city that it once was. I don't think that it's going to be the same situation that we have seen in other countries. It's a large group of professionals who are committed professionally as well as emotionally to this project. So we want to make sure that this conservation process is done right. So hopefully in a few years we'll come back here to Havana. We'll be able to present the new Havana as we have achieved it. So a Havana that's not only one that's prepared for the 21st century, but that's even more beautiful than the one that we have today. The process that we have launched is based on 5 premises. In order for us to have a very successful process, we need to have one with good governance. This means that we need to have plans that have been approved by the citizenry so that we can carry out a process that is highly organized. This is a comprehensive development plan. It's not only urban planning. When I talk about a comprehensive plan and comprehensive development, it includes where the resources are coming from, how they are allocated, what are the fundamental objectives that it is trying to achieve. It includes the cultural, environmental, social components to the plan, all of the dimensions that need to be balanced in order for us to have this comprehensive development that we need to have in order to face these complex problems. We also need to have a level of authority that is capable of managing such a project, which is the historian's office. It's been directed for many, many years by Mr. Spangler, who is a leader in the field and has led this conservation effort both physically and I think socially.
Esa autoridad única está reconocida
This
legalmente,
sole
es decir, hay una voluntad política al más alto nivel.
authority, I think, has to have the highest level possible, so that we can do this work in a coordinated fashion and have all of the organizations delegated to this conservation effort. I think the director, for example, would be the historian's office, and all of these musicians would be the actors that are going to take place or that are going to act in the conservation efforts. So we need that direction, we need that leadership. If we don't have that, then it wouldn't be a symphony, it would be just completely chaotic, it would be a bunch of noise. So we need that that leadership.
Del material Hablemos de La Habana Vieja, que en realidad tiene 18 minutos, es más largo, más profundo, que fue una maravilla.
The clip that we saw about Old Havana, which was only about 18 minutes long, we saw that we were able to produce this documentary
más fácilmente con la ciudadanía,
a lot easier with the help of the citizenry, as the presenter had said earlier, that the plan was not in the beginning to have the citizenry participate, but it did turn out to be much easier. So if we want to have a good plan, we need to take our time making the plan. Of course, you can't make a plan in just a couple of months, and we need everyone to have ownership over the plan. So we also need the participation of all ministers, the citizenry, so that it can have that legal binding effect and actually lead to actual changes. The second important point of the plan is culture and cultural development. So why culture? Well, because it gives us our identity. It gives us that sense of ownership, of belonging. It is a spectacular industry. And what we have most in this historical center is culture. It's actual tangible culture. And I think that it's kind of the motor of the development of this territory. Obviously, we need to incorporate sustainability into the plan in all levels. Obviously, with what has to do with the environment, but also sustainability as a general concept. Here we see that sustainability has always been at the center of our work. Also, people are first. The citizens, the people of our country are at the center of our plan. If we don't take them into account, then there's no reason to do what we do. Citizens also, I like this photo in particular because it talks about the work that we do, which is across generations. We work with vulnerable populations, but all of those populations are interrelated. It's not just the older individuals on this side and the younger individuals on another. Everyone is sharing and kind of in this solidified effort. The fifth lesson has to do with economic diversification, and economic diversification of the area. I think it has to be done at a local level that should be efficiently solid and heterogeneous in order to lead to sustainability. That is why we need these resources that are decentralized. This is something that makes this historical center kind of a laboratory, because we do want this economically diverse area. We're immersed in this economic reform and social reform, and all of this is very important. And we have a lot of hopes for this. But what we need to do is to decentralize the economy. 20 years ago, it was decentralized in the historical center. And so what is produced within the historical center stays in the historical center. That includes social programs, the contributions of the government, so that we can improve the living conditions of the people who are living there now. This recovery and conservation efforts, which can be seen here in gray, or I guess it's a light blue, is what is done by the public sector. So basically by the historian's office. This conservation effort has been joined with the private sector, which can be seen here in orange. So there's a new actor in the effort, but they're joining our effort in the conservation and rehabilitation of Havana. So now the strategy for the work has changed quite significantly because of this, because now we have public spaces that are being restored and private spaces as well that are being restored.
Asociados a esos lugares que ya están reanimados o que se están
already becoming alive again in those public spaces and urban networks. So we have private enterprises have started to appear, restaurants, art galleries, beauty salons. We start small businesses are showing up, but with social responsibility. We're committed to the community to generate employment and so forth. And we follow them very closely because it has become a sort of a contagion of a reproduction of what we're doing from the historic center, but it's a smaller scale in the right in the heart of the community. And in this sense, the owner of this place, together with what they have been mobilizing other small businessmen in this neighborhood, has generated, for example, a school to teach hairdressing school, so young people can make a living open up their own businesses. And we also organize the cultural activities in the neighborhood. There's some dynamic in that place that has been spreading to other parts of where the citizens become organized. And they satisfy certain demands of the place. Now we're going to see there's a clip of the next documentary that we're doing with Streetlights, with Jasper, Carlito, Felipe, and so forth, that has to do with this new actor that is appearing in the urban scene, the small businessman. But we're going to see it not just in Havana, but in other cities as well. They didn't exist before, in particular in historic centers. Historic centers not only are the cradle of the cultural richness and historic richness, they are magnets for visitors and the financial engines for the public. And this is a key moment that the citizenship can have their own ecological and cultural and social projects. Cuban entrepreneurs. In 2011, the author of the historian of Havana and Streetlights finished the film Let's Talk About Old Havana, and this was used to have the plan of restoration of Old Havana, and generated a very significant conversation about the future of the city. One of the first it was one of the first consultations with the citizens in Cuba. Now we are starting a new project that documents the most inspiring projects of the citizens of historic centers in Cuba. And this will be shown in the historic centers to inspire people to join in this renaissance. They have their own project. The new film will be about a hairdresser in North Havana who opened up a hairdressing school in his neighborhood. The project of Papito is changing the life of many young people in the neighborhood, particularly among them Johnny. He was he was a young man at risk. But this is opening a path to prosperity and the opportunity to open up a new business. We're also concentrating on Fatima. She's an actress and a theater director in Santiago, and she and her company are starting to rebuild a new theater in a neighborhood that needs it. And also there are the residents that are launching little restaurants and other projects. The movie will be ready in mid-2016. When this is shown in Cuba, Cuba will show the way that people view the future of the Hispanic Center and will inspire people to emulate. So this is the upcoming movie. This is something that is going to help us make decision makers understand how this new force that is joining the recovery of the city can contribute that big force and dynamism. When I talk to Papito, who's a hairdresser, I said, very few can do a lot. Sometimes we're waiting for these huge resources that should come but never actually come, never materialize. But we looked at all the a lot of small enterprises can really give a lot to the historic center. We're seeing that somehow this lab stemming from the citizenship that is becoming to expand as an oil stain, but also to not only Havana but other historic centers in the country. When we have their offices very similar to ours, we're networking with them, and we saw the need to jump to a larger scale. The Bay of Havana is right now it's a place that is absolutely strategic for the development of Havana city. Not long ago, we decided to move all the commercial activity of the Bay of Havana to a different port, different harbor, the harbor of Mariel, about 40 kilometers away from Havana. And this positioned the city of Havana between two areas of development in Cuba, in the Cuban Republic. This is a new term because here we have a whole bunch of synergy and accelerated human development. This fast economic development is being promoted. This is the port, the harbor, and also the beach of Varadero. So Havana will be again in a very, very strategic position, and in this strategic position of Havana, the bay also is in a very strategic position within the city of Havana. The historic center that we just saw, the dynamic recovery that is being done, has been recognized as part of the general plan of the city as one of the most vital centers of the city, together with other centers. But obviously, whatever happens in the Bay of Havana will be the historic center will be enclosed, will be like a macro centrality that will happen in that territory. So it's very important to point out that the office of the Havana's historian will start this work on the Bay because the Bay has been, they are administrators of the patrimony of humanity, and that this and the bay and a whole bunch of sort of fortifications, and this is considered like a bumper stone zone of the historic center. UNESCO says that all declared areas have to have a bumper stone, and everything that happens within has to be well analyzed, so that this whole area was declared very recently, coincidentally, and on December 17th of last year. And for us, that was a very, very important date. I was declared an area of protection of the Republic of Cuba. So anything that happens within in the water or in the industrial areas, all of this has to go through a filter where the Commission of Monuments will have to approve. So this is very good news, because it means that whatever will happen over here will have the culture before anything else. So these are the values contained in the territory. The bay is an extraordinarily rich area. It has an incredible patrimony. It has an industrial background that's related to railroads, even an electric railroad, one of the very few that are still working in the world. So it's really a rare bird, a very precious rare bird in my city. This whole industrial heritage, the big storage places with extraordinary future. Also, the Havana was the most important area in the colonial commercial routes. The many sunken ships and with fantastic treasures, and this is all part of that richness of the Bay of Havana. And also, there's a sanctuary in this place. Here is a virgin patron of sailors in the syncretic cultures that are practiced, popularly practiced in Cuba. In Cuba in general, and particularly in Havana. So we're getting ready, obviously. We are, at this time, we're building the necessary tools to facilitate the handling of that very rich cultural heritage of the Bay of Havana, that has an instrument that is inside another larger instrument, which is the general plan for the Bay of Havana and its surrounding area. For that, we're talking about 2,140 hectares, 10 times larger than the historic center, more or less, and the plan of the city is being developed over 4,400 hectares. So the document that we are starting to draft right now, we already have a diagnosis and we're starting to inventory. Obviously, it's a job that is done with many different institutions, with ambientalists, with environmentalists, with culture, museums. Residents of the area will participate around the bay, and also we are going to create an atlas of the cultural patrimony of that area, and also a plan for also the buffer zone. And this is some instruments that I think are going to be very powerful, and they need to be approved, of course, on the highest level of approval of our government, to guarantee and to ensure that development of the Bay of Havana will be comprehensive, will be fair, and be something very similar to what happened in the historic center of Havana. And we already have a 20 years experience of work, and we think we're going in the right path. So here are some pictures, some images of the work, of the job developed by young architects. Architects are working with us. Some of this work has been sponsored by Claudia, and this is a pioneer area around the bay, also in Inclán. And here are some images of what could inspire, what this territory could inspire us. So we finish with this picture and with this phrase: what we want is a friendly city, a kind city to the citizens. We want the city of Havana to go first of all to Habaneros, and the second place for the entire world, for all of you. So you're always welcome. You're always welcome in our country. And thank you very much for your attention.
Patricia, thank you so much. Fantastic to see both how these tools that have been used in the Historic Center are being conceived as scaled up on a broader level, and then also rethinking this apparent tension between development and conservation, and actually thinking how conservation and preservation can actually be used as tools for economic development. I think is just incredibly interesting. And that takes us more directly to the future. And we're now going to hear from Orlando Inclán and Claudia Castillo, who are some of the most dynamic young architects in Cuba. I see them blushing, but it's actually true. And they are actually founders of a new organization called Havana Regeneración, which seeks to create new ideas for how the future of the city might unfold. And they're going to present some of these physical ideas, but also ideas about how engagement of citizens in planning the future might also transpire. So welcome. Thank you.
Buenas noches, muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí en esta tarde de Habana. Pudiéramos decir, queremos empezar como debemos hacer, como corresponde, agradeciendo, por supuesto, a Jasper Goldman, quien ha hecho un esfuerzo increíble por traer a estos 4 cubanos hasta los Estados Unidos para hablar de nuestras experiencias particulares, de nuestras ideas, de nuestra energía. Y siempre él dice, transmitan eso que ustedes tanto le ponen en La Habana. Y entonces a eso venimos, y por supuesto a Michael Hooper, a Harvard, a todas las personas involucradas directa o indirectamente con la organización de estos encuentros, que ha sido realmente muy compleja.
Sí, también quisiéramos agradecer y además quisiéramos pedirle un aplauso al resto del equipo.
The rest of the team, Havana Regeneración, that for obvious reasons cannot be here, but please we want a warm applause, the hand to the rest of the team of Havana Regeneración. When we were coming over here, organizing our trip, we said, well, we're going to Harvard. And where? Where are you going? Harvard. But Harvard, the actual Harvard, and I think being here normalizes a little bit this relationship between Cuba and the United States, that I really hope that finally we will have normal relationship that we always had as a culture and as energy between one people and the other. So being here is also part of we can be building as nations that are so close to one another. Thank you so much. Well, what is going with Havana that suddenly is very fashionable? A year ago, Havana was in the headlines in all the media, and there always news about Havana. Many people that we met, they say, oh, well, they have been in Havana, they were in Havana. This will make us, naturally we have been in the world news, but before answering what is going on with Havana, we want to really tell you what has happened with Havana. Very quickly, I want to tell you what has been going on with Havana in the past 55 years. Particularly, we're going to point out, we're going to tell you about some issues that have been affecting and generating direct changes in the city. In 1960, the law of urban reform stated that all people in Havana would become owners of the houses or apartments where they lived. Some of them of these dwellings were nationalized, and this generates a very big change in the urban situation of the city. After 1967, the closing of the School of Architecture, of course, this did away with the private practice of the profession, and everything was centered in the Ministry of Building and the State Enterprises. So architectures were really excluded from, especially the ones that are working in small scale, working with dwellings and small businesses. And also, of course, architects were not allowed to work in a larger scale within the city. Also, all this construction, all these efforts were generated in other parts of the country. And Havana, not until 1982, as Patricia said, that was recognized as a World Heritage by UNESCO. And of course, all the eyes were set on the historic center, as Patricia said. And all these things have started going on since 1982, but also since then, it was a holding. It was the city practically doubled its in the same area. Then the number of the populations doubled in the city, but the city didn't actually expand. And everybody saw how years went by, but there was no new construction. In 1991, after the fall of the Wall of Berlin,
the country went into an economic crisis, which impacted practically everything. So the only thing that we had was our creativity. And during the crisis, we saw very interesting things, which we like to call an accidental sustainability. So we took the bike. Amsterdam was jealous of Havana because they would have loved to have had so many bikes as Havana. We had no cars. We had to recycle all products. So consumerism was reduced to zero, basically. And so we were pretty much pioneers of this recycling effort. And so Havana was kind of an accident. It's a product of that need. In 2004, we start seeing a very interesting process where the most important universities in the entire world, except for our own, of course, started to look at Havana. Universities in the United States also started to study Havana. There's one plan from Nicolás Quintana about how the city was laid out and how it was part of these studies and these analyses, because of course the objective was different. It wasn't only what was going on in the city at that time. In 2008, it was also very important because there were a lot of economic changes and lots of measures that led to the current economic situation. We also saw urban dynamic situations that led to 2011, when Cuban people were finally able to sell and to buy homes. This, I think, was a direct impact on the citizens and on the city itself, because it was different ways for people to sell and to buy their homes, but all of this had to be controlled. because of course this leads to gentrification, structural changes, things that I think go hand in hand with this law that was passed in 2011. In 2014, which is quite recently, this of course you see
17 de diciembre del 2015, la reapertura de la embajada, o sea, el 17 se normalizan las relaciones, unos meses después se abre la embajada de los Estados Unidos en La Habana, y con esto se abre un nuevo escenario también para la ciudad, no solo para la política, sino también para la concepción urbana de la ciudad.
So what do we have now? In these years, of course, we have lots of creativity, lots of experience, but no growth in the city. So Havana is now looking at a lot of urban uncertainties. We haven't had the opportunity to develop different plans and different cyclical patterns. And that's when we have to recognize that no matter how strong the crisis, we still have to keep our sight on the city. So we look at all of the problems that we have that are quite difficult to resolve, which are technical infrastructure, potable water, electricity, utilities for the homes. These are things that have become a very great difficulty because the city and the number of inhabitants is growing, but the infrastructure is not growing along with it. Another problem that we have is, of course, mobility. Havana does not have a public transportation system. So no, it does have a bus line, but it's not a public transportation system. So it's something that actually leads to lots of chaos, especially during rush hour. And a lot of people have begun to reject all public transportation measures that we have taken because we really don't have anything that's quite good at the moment. Another main problem that we have are the construction, the housing, and the deteriorated conditions of the housing. We haven't been able to have a continuous conservation of all of the housing. So we see these historic buildings that are supposed to be for 1 or 2 families at the most, and there are actually 50 families living there. And so this is a very difficult problem that we have that, of course, we see in all parts of the world, but Havana is a particular situation. We have about 500,000 people in Havana that do not have housing. And so this is a very alarming problem with regard to urban development. This is a little bit of information in terms of the demographics of Havana. We have almost 900,000 people who have grown up within this territory that have not seen a single change in its construction or it's in the actual buildings. There are 2 million total inhabitants in Havana. Over 57% are elders, which is something that's quite considerable because I think that Havana needs to prepare itself for a very old population, especially because it doesn't have the developmental capacities of a contemporary city to deal with such an aging population. Also, there are over 40% who were born in the 60s or after, who haven't seen the drastic changes that Havana went through. So the same Havana they were born into is the same Havana they live in now. They haven't seen any changes, and suddenly they're going to see a lot of different changes. But at the same time, you know, we have a lot of difficulties, but of course it has a lot of potential. And that's what we actually like to talk about. Havana, as I said, has about 22,000 hectares and has the capacity to recycle, to conserve, so that it can resolve the problems within its own territories. It doesn't need to look at other territories because Havana has its own capabilities of recycling within its own territory. So obviously recycling is one of the opportunities that we have seen. It's been an experience that we have had in Havana in its architectural space. In 2011, people were able to buy and sell homes, and so the homes were able to be changed in order to adapt them for the families that are living there now. So you can modify the architectural kind of organization of a home in order to better serve the needs of the families that are living there now. So we didn't have to look at norms or guidelines or anything with regard to architecture. The Cubans learned to do it all themselves. Here we see that the deficits in the market actually led to the recycling of lots of objects so that they can be of better use for their own lives. And so Cubans have learned to recycle over and over again all of the furniture and all of the objects that they already owned. So everything always had a new life. It never just stopped functioning. It was always given a new life. Another opportunity in Havana is also the valuable heritage outside of the historical center. So we have a lot of heritage within and outside of the city. So it's things that have not been conserved in over 40 years, but do have the value so that its own citizens are able to recognize it and can see that it needs to be conserved. Here you can see a very important architectural building in Cuba that's found outside of the historical center, but it's still very important to conserve. Here we have our people and culture. The population of Havana is the most important thing because it's not only about the city or about the building, it's about people. It's people that have very high levels of education, who require a city that will satisfy their needs, but also can identify with their own city. It's a very cultural city, and that is the way that we can transmit our messages throughout all of the generations, and that is the way that we live and work. Also, the climate of Havana, we are always in a state of summer, and so we don't have any problems with regard to weather, except for, of course, the occasional hurricane. But there aren't actually very many environmental accidents that we have suffered. So we can have very beautiful greenery in Havana, and it would lead to the beauty of the restored Havana. Here in the 1990s, we see that we started to introduce the capacity of hotels to serve the tourist industry. So not only is it hotels that can serve the tourist industry, but also people's homes. And so this is the opportunity for people to open up their homes to tourists, kind of in a style of a bed and breakfast, and then it can bring income into the family. It's something that started in the 1990s that has been regulated by the government, and it's a way for us to be able to conserve the number of hotels that we have now without adding any new hotels, but still having more lodging for the growing number of tourists, because now we're opening, people's homes. So it's kind of like an Airbnb here in the United States or in other countries. It's that same idea, but in Cuba. But of course, it has the support of the government, the ability to charge taxes, So it's more regulated, and it's a better way for the government to allow people to make a little more money. Also, we have the taxis. Since we don't have a very dependable bus system, we've learned to have a different way of moving throughout the city. So we have the different taxis that maybe I should explain how it works so that I'm sure you guys have already shared taxis with one another. But this, again, is something that has come out of the necessity that we have. So it's not only a taxi with one person that's going to one place. It's a taxi that's actually full to the max with as many people as possible that goes to several different areas. And so it's this social spontaneity that has recognized that there is a problem that needs to be resolved in terms of transportation, and we need to take this into account when we talk about Havana in the future. Also, this territorial opportunity, we need to expand from the center of Havana. Of course, we have opportunities within the center of Havana, in the old Savannah and of Havana, but also look at the different opportunities that we have in areas that haven't been as developed. We need to support Cuba in all areas so that they can take advantage of all of the opportunities that will be afforded to them, so that it's not only the center of Havana that's important as in prior years, but all of Cuba. So what does our future look like? In 2007, we decided actually to establish Havana Regeneration, which is a group of friends who have our own, state jobs. And we work from 8 to 5 at our jobs, but then from 5 p.m. to 8 in the morning, we work on Havana Regeneration. And we decided to form this nonprofit organization in order to look at change and the future regeneration of Havana. So we're trying to look at the position of Havana in the Caribbean to highlight the importance of this city so that it can transmit and share its knowledge and its practices in the urban areas. So the proposal is to understand the city not only within its own metropolitan area, but in this entire area. So it expands outside of the metropolitan area. This would be Great Havana. These beautiful towns that are to the south of the city finally would be able to contribute and to grow and form or become a part of this network of cities within Cuba, so that it can form Great Havana, which is kind of an atypical city in the region. This is something that has started in 2004. As you can see here, the first diagrams with regard to the bay in Havana. This is, as Patricia had mentioned, this is very, very important in order for the regeneration of the city. Here, the Bay of Havana is the center of the entire area. And so it's fundamental to its growth. And it has allowed us to establish this very interesting area that will lead us to consolidate the entire region of Havana so that it would be easier to grow, to develop. It's all of this proposal is based on the Bay of Havana. Also, we have a space here that is able to, as you can see here in the green, that can feed right into the blue areas, which are the most deprived areas of the city. And we're also very happy to say that part of the study, which had many students, especially Claudia, who was a student at the time in 2008, and many other students since then, they have been able to incorporate institutional spaces into institutions so that we can take advantage of all of them and have them participate in the project, in addition to other independent groups that have been contributing to all of the knowledge that we have now in urban development. And these are the institutions that will finally decide the future of our city. But I think our position as young people, as professionals in Havana, it is our duty to contribute to this development in order for us to be able to have the future of Havana. Here we see a web page that talks about our World Heritage properties that are in disuse, that need to be conserved and restored. This is a plan that's very attractive in Havana, and there's actually one area that we have been using kind of as a practice area that have been leading us to very attractive and interesting ideas for Havana in the future. Accidental sustainability. This is also part of what we want to integrate into that Havana regeneration, these concepts, these ideas to build a new city. Yes, of course, in this accidental sustainability, mobility is very important. So these are all these common taxis that we have spoken about. 30% of the population in Havana in 1 year has made use of these taxis. So sometimes we give it, we don't give it a specific name maybe to the route that it takes or whatever, but we know which car goes down that route, how much it's going to cost. It's all very structured. And so it's something that the city has to implement in order to have a very efficient public transport, so that then we don't actually have those problems of, you know, an increased number of vehicles with not enough parking for these vehicles, and it just becomes kind of this vicious cycle of problems. These are some of the things that we actually don't have in Havana right now, which is like a train system and other types of modes of transportation. We have a mix of different people in old historical buildings. These are historical buildings that are being restored and that are still being shared by all of the families of Havana. So this is the only way that we can solve the problem of the deficit, the great lack of housing in Havana. So these are things that we have been practicing for years, this recycling, this new use of different things, different systems of housing in order to solve our problems that are going to come in very handy in the future. Also, with regard to sustainability, this is something that we do every single day. This is a project that is quite complicated, where gardeners go every single, or rather, it's not a project that where gardeners go every single morning to tend to the garden. This is actually something that happens absolutely naturally on its own. Nobody tends to it. It's absolutely beautiful. During the summer, it is absolutely gorgeous to walk down the street and see this vegetation that has grown absolutely naturally. And so this is something that we have to take advantage of in Havana, because it's something that we need to embrace in the city. Also, in the 1990s, there was a lack of food and a lack of vegetables and means to feed the population. And so we need to take advantage of this heat, of this endless summer, and have this urban agriculture that we can incorporate into Havana. As you can see here, this entire green area is part of Havana, and we can develop it so that it is organized in a way that it can feed its own population. In Havana, it doesn't matter what time of night it is or what time of day, nothing will happen to you. It's very, very safe. Now, obviously, you know, that's not entirely true. When I say nothing, it also means that there's not a single taxi in sight. But I think that Havana is as beautiful as it is because of its safety, because it doesn't matter what street you go down. If you go down an alley, it doesn't matter because it's a very safe area. And I think it's because Cubans have this sense of ownership over their own public space. So our climate is always one that allows us to go outside, to have some fresh air, to lay about in the shade. And I think that this allows us to have this sense of security, sense of ownership. And I hope that architects are able to embrace this and incorporate it in urban development. Also here, the value of property is exactly the same for all properties in Havana. And this is something that needs to change because the properties that are along the coast obviously are of higher value. And so we need to be able to kind of use the resources that we get with the properties along the coast to distribute them down, further down south into the other properties that are found more inland. Also, there's a lot of Cuban entrepreneurs in Havana that are generating this local dynamic that is even more important than the one that the government itself is doing. And so this is a science that is actually being studied. This is something that's being done because Cuban entrepreneurs know that they need to have their own business, that they need to take advantage of. So creativity is one of the most important things in Havana. So on an international level, it's understood that it is Havana needs to be and wants to become a trending city. Of course, we know how to be creative, and that has been a product of our necessity, of our need. But I think that it's also something that's going to help us out in the long run.
Challenges. We have lots of alternatives. We have lots of spaces that we shall not lose. We have two variables here. Havana is at a crossroads right now, and this is something that is an issue for this generation. Havana is at a point where either we save all the things we have learned as a product of necessity, but we wanted it to be a prosperous city. We want, all of us from Havana want to have a functional city, a contemporary city, a city where that is habitable, that is kind, that is easy, but it's also part of that heritage, of that knowledge that we have acquired because of the circumstances. And the variable is to have a city that a model will be applied that has nothing to do with Havana, that we're going to lose the spirit and the essence of the city. And all these years of financial difficulty, suddenly that whole new thing, that whole energy, that whole thing that the city has learned in this period will vanish. It's not very easy. It's a very complicated decision. We really don't know what is going to happen to come to one variable. We have a lot of questions. These are some of the questions that we ask ourselves daily in our research and our daily life, and so many of them we just don't have an answer yet. We're coming here to share with you, to discuss it with you, try and get some answers, and to get more support and more people who can come with us, we are sure that the Havana we want is Havana for everybody, an ecological, open, a friendly, sustainable Havana that will be a source of pride, not only for people from Havana, but for the rest of the world. I hope we'll be able to come someday to show you Havana a few years from now, and I hope it will be very soon as a model of sustainable city, of a city that will be a model for the rest of the world. We do have the opportunity, and we can do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Orlando and Claudia. I'd love to now have our speakers come up to the front, and we'd love to take some questions from the audience while they are chilling some drinks and other things for the reception that will start at 8:30 in the lobby. So until then, we have about 15 minutes or so. So if our speakers could come up to the chairs. I know there's roving microphones, so please raise your hand. Here we go, our first question.
Sí, mi pregunta es para Patricia.
It's for Patricia. The drainage of all Havana, are you rebuilding it? Are you renovating it? Will you have enough resources so that Havana can, all Havana can handle all the influx of tourism over there?
Esto, ¿se oye, sí? ¿Está funcionando? A ver, como explicaron Claudia, en
and the city of Havana has all their network, all their public services have collapsed. They are overused, they are outdated, they lack maintenance. I think that's one of the handicaps we have in Havana, one of the impediments of the development. We are undertaking some work in some areas. There is some improvement. There is some improvement in some, but in the case we have done some restoration of our drainage system, but of filtering, of cleaning. We have done some work in some areas, in some bits, but we are rethinking even this, because why throwing polluted, contaminated waters, and we can have an urban structure. So we really are rethinking everything, even in all our projects, even the existing projects. We are thinking of different ways to improve all the drainage system in Havana, but we think that there should be a different vision, perhaps, with new concepts, more ecologically oriented.
Well, let's actually move on. Maybe we can, I think that was a great question, but let's make sure we get enough people. Who has the next microphone? Up here, yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
How are you documenting everything that is happening? Because as Jasper said in the beginning, I think it's more important not to learn from other cities, but rather cities learn from Havana. For example, Cartagena in Colombia is a city that I think is very similar to Havana in many ways, where the historic center is very small, it's very beautiful, but it's in danger. So how are you producing a document? It would be wonderful if you could just do that so other people can follow your example. Well, of course, we are writing down the processes. We have methodology and instruments where we are working with academies. We have a direct relationship with the College of Architecture. Claudia and Inclán teach at the School of Architecture. I teach at another college. Of course, certainly, we're systematizing the processes in order to socialize them and share them, not only within Havana, but also with other cities other Cuban cities. Havana, undoubtedly, in this new situation, we are persuaded that Havana is a key piece, and many investments will want to. We are eyeing Havana. We want to invest in Havana, and we need their investment. But we are trying to establish some rules of the game where both parties can live together and can.
Oh yeah, please.
I think that we're lacking that vision, that to some extent. We have to systematize what we're doing, particularly in the historic center. We are well aware that these things are happening, but sometimes we don't have very clear in our head all the different processes that occur in the city. And we should recognize bicycles. Even today, some people in Havana don't want to hear about bicycles because associated to extreme lacking, to extreme poverty. And so some people don't want to hear about bicycles. So, and we have to incorporate slowly all these things. Things happen for the good of Havana and for the rest of the cities. But this is something that, yes, we really should do it more formally.
Great question. Yes, please.
As part of the last set of slides, you had one slide that talked about the fact that the value or the price of property throughout Havana was the same. How can you bring in sort of individual entrepreneurship in that, and how are the values determined? If you could expand on that a little bit, I'd be interested. And of course, that's why I speak English and not.
He's just translating the question.
Es complicado porque no ha existido
Complicated.
Valor del suelo en La Habana por más de 55 años.
For about 55 years, we haven't had a value or an amount, and this is a basic tool. Of course, when we start any process of regeneration, of reconversion of the city, we need that. But what happens then when we legalize the possibility of purchase and sale of dwellings? I think this is already have some influence on the value of the soil. And so, of course, there are some areas, of course, that are more expensive and more valuable. And now we have all the new bigger enterprises. We have a process of relationship between urbanism, economy, society that is happening in a very natural way. But somehow we can't let it just go there freely. We have to have some order. We have to have a tool. But what happens is the whole thing is so complex that I think that would lead us, it will take time for us to really come up with some structure thing, and because at the moment it's kind of chaotic. I'd like to add something. When we talk about Havana, we also say we're not the typical examples of the processes that you can analyze. All of a sudden, we are facing a city of the 21st century that doesn't have, has very basic urbanism. We don't have any tools. We don't have any systems. So we have to change the ways we analyze the city. We can't solve things with the very basic tools that we have. We have to be creative in our analyzing processes. And because there's a market, of course, there's a market that has they're not related to any law, they're haphazard. So there's some kind of social dynamism, and that is very interesting. But it's outside from the institutions. The institutions don't even have statistics or the value. They don't know how much a house is being bought for or sold for. They go through online sites, and it's a very interesting process of negotiation where maybe suddenly everything goes cheaper, or some houses are sold at $1 million for no reason whatsoever. And who's going to pay $1 million cash? And some people are doing it. So all the traditional tools are not working. We have to invent new methods to analyze what is going on, and we have to put Havana. We have to try to understand Havana so she can be herself and finds her own solutions. Just to finish this issue, we could talk about the Copelia ice cream. That is one of the most centric areas of the city, and in the 60s, there was an ice cream parlor there. And where can you suggest a person to make an ice cream parlor in the most expensive area of the country? But it worked, and somebody did it. So it's very interesting to see how that other different ways of thinking about the city should be incorporated to the changes and should not be regulated in the usual ways or the traditional ways. A very quick comment. Urbanists in Cuba, we are persuaded that Havana had two huge sources of resources, the soil and the culture. 10 years ago, we had a working relationship, a very good working relationship with the Lincoln Institute here in Boston. I think we're going to reinstate that relationship because at that time they helped us a lot. We had very interesting meetings, and we are very interested, and we shared how the Lincoln Institute sees the land policies, and we have no knowledge. We recognize that this is a very basic value, and we need this kind of exchange. Well, yes, and we also think that money has to come from the ground. The regeneration of Havana is in the land, and we have to learn. We have to know more.
So I saw actually the gentleman with the glasses, and then maybe down here.
Hi. Hola, más fácil. ¿En qué sentido creen que se relaciona?
How do you think?
¿En qué sentido se
How do you think
estos cambios
all these changes, political and economic changes, are in the urban areas are related with the economy and the politics at a national level? Well, it's a direct relationship, of course. Cuba is a few years ago. Cuba launched a very important financial reform that will have a huge impact, direct impact. Furthermore, all this normalization of relations with the U.S. it really has a lot to do with that economic reform, and it will have a huge impact on the cities, of course. It's interesting. The non-entrepreneurs. Years ago, there were only 3 or 4 private businesses, but in a very few years, I'm talking about months, young people want to be entrepreneurs, and they don't have a huge amount of money. Maybe they're doing it from whatever they have, and they work from home to create a business. Some have done very well, some done horribly, but a lot 70% of the population is not working for the state, and this has completely changed the face of the city. 5 years ago, we were asking future architects where they saw themselves, and they always say, "Oh, I have to leave Cuba." But now, for the past 2 years, we're going to work right here. We're staying in Cuba. And I think this is something that reflects everything else. In our case, Habana Regeneración, it shows that we're not representing any official institution. We're just a group of friends who we want to stay in Havana, we want to stay in Havana, we want to build Havana, we want to think Havana. And 5 years ago, it was unthinkable. So just being here shows that the change is possible, can happen.
So let's take one last quick question here. Gentleman in the white, yeah.
Well, there's something that is concerning me, and this is about cultural values that will change in Havana. Aside from the most important thing there is the people. What is going to happen to the people? You're thinking about the architecture and all this rebuilding and all that, but what is happening to the actual people and the culture? When private investors come and they want to buy, and the need to obtain resources to be able to improve the infrastructure and to build. People have to be displaced, will be displaced, and perhaps in the future we're going to see in Havana where you cannot sit around at the Malecón and chit-chat with people out in the streets. We'll find foreigners, where people who are not Cuban, who bought their houses there and their businesses there, but they have not lived in Cuba. So how to avoid that? Well, what we have tried to do with this purchase and sale of dwellings, we don't sell to foreigners who live outside the country. A purchase and sale is within Cubans or permanent residents of Cuba. Also Cubans who reside in Cuba, of course. I think these are some elements that are in the hands of the government has to regulate so it won't happen. And in fact, the politics, we want to preserve that lovely, that kind, that jolly Havana. But when I talk about culture, I'm talking actually about culture, about the people who produce that culture, who generate that culture, that lovely, that beautiful sense of Havana. It is very, very challenging. There's no question about it. And there's a huge amount of pressure. There will be a great deal of pressure. But this
We're going to wrap up with Claudia here. So, a really positive comment. No. But this will be our last response. Go for it, Claudia.
Para eso también estamos aquí, para visibilizar la oportunidad que tiene La Habana de que no suceda eso. Para eso también queremos que La
We want the Havana to be understood, will be known. The component of people, we people from Havana, we feel a little bit outside from the rest of the Cubans, but we're also very proud, I mean, maybe excessively proud. So I think that civil society and that great interest in preserving what interests us would be our biggest challenge. That's our biggest challenge, but it's in our hands if we can achieve this.
I think we should probably leave it there because we're over time and the caterers are waiting for us. So on that note, let's give a round of applause for our guests. Yeah.